Okay, now that we got the audience calmed down a little bit, welcome to our public information session regarding the urban tree inventory for the town of Winchester. With me tonight are Eric Christensen from EC Horticulturist, Beth Christensen, same company, Tom Herschel, town of Winchester, and Lance Hansen, also town of Winchester, and I'm Jim Rollins, Director of Public Works. So the reason we are here tonight is the town of Winchester embarked on an urban tree inventory, which is sponsored in part by Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection with an urban and community forestry planning grant. The reason we applied for this grant and received it is because shade trees and urban trees in town are, a pretty important part of quality of life. And it's also a high maintenance item for the town. It's a liability for the town. So we have to balance the desire to have shade trees and the liability that the town has to maintain them with all the other uses of town. And I know Eric will get into the synergies, more so as we go on. But, you've got conflicts with trees, the wrong trees in the wrong places. We have them growing up into the telephone wires, into the traffic lights, in front of street signs, in front of windows on Main Street. So those need maintenance. And the trick is to put the right trees in the right place, which was attempted back when the Shade Tree Committee planted most of these trees in the public right-of-way, but that didn't go as well as it could have. So we're revisiting this with the intention of improving upon what we have and gaining a lot of public benefit. And because there's grant money available, DEP requires that we hold a public information meeting, in part so that they know that their money's being spent in a way, mostly because they want their money to be spent in a way that's supported by the public. And we've got an audience of people, and we've also got people that are watching on YouTube. So we want to get the word out, what we're trying to do, and Eric can get into the how and even more of the why. But the short answer from not only the Director of Public Works, I'm the tree warden, and I need to do more than just cut hazard trees. We keep cutting, but we keep not replacing, and eventually that leads down to a bad urban outcome. So I don't have the expertise to do that, so we hired somebody who does, and I will hand it off to Eric to kind of communicate where we're at and maybe some ideas of where we're going, and then we can take other ideas of where people want to see the town go as far as the urban forest from the public, either the ones that are here or via email through the website. So Eric, with that, take it away.
All right, thanks, Jim. We have a little slideshow here that we'll be running through, outlining a lot of the work we've been doing, and I think when I look at trees in the town, I think it adds a lot of value. I think the first thing to start with is understanding urban forestry and some of the things it does for the town. There's what is urban forestry? It's planning and maintaining and protecting tree populations in the urban settings around homes, etc. So I guess the idea is we can all appreciate trees and what they can bring to the town as far as aesthetics, the cooling of the asphalts, and cleaning the air and improving values. But like Jim was saying, it's a lot of money to maintain them. So what we want to try to do is, in order to move forward with a proper plan, you're going to have what is here that exists, what direction we want to move in. That's the large part of this forum, is to try to get public input as to how the community views trees and whether they find them as very important or more of a cost or what have you. So So we were, so the first way to move forward, I think, is to understand kind of what you have. So we've been hired to do a full inventory of the trees that exist here, what kind of conditions there are, and try to prioritize which ones need attention in the short run and which ones need attention in the long run.
I'm gonna jump right into and add a little bit of clarification. You know, doing an inventory and assessment of the trees we have is limited to a relatively small area of Main Street, kind of the Main Street corridor, and then maybe a block or so off the Main Street corridor. And that's in large part because that's what's visible to the public first off. And then eventually, we hope to expand this out, you know, to the rest of the more developed part of town, and even partly out into the rural areas. And what we learn from this assessment will go into our asset management program so that we can provide proper maintenance, track our maintenance costs, so when it comes to budget, people understand where their dollars are going. So, thanks.
Right.
And there's a clear difference between a town that has no street trees in terms of aesthetic value and one that has lots of street trees.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, if you,
Talk in the microphone.
I find if you
Sorry,
put-
everyone.
Okay. So run that picture again, Beth. real
Right,
quick.
yeah, so a town that has no street trees has higher temperatures associated with that street and just fewer aesthetic values. And then when you compare that to an area with abundant street trees, the feeling that you get from it is pretty distinctly different.
And Winstead is kind of even though we're starting this town assessment at this point in time, we've kind of a little bit ahead of the curve as far as getting involved in improving the city diversity of trees. We started in East End Park, and several years ago, a lot of the maple trees had died out, so we've added a lot of trees into those park areas. And but now with this idea, we've expanded it, like Jim had mentioned, to the parks and to the main corridor. And what we're involved with is first doing an assessment of what trees are here. And what we've done with that is we've incorporated a program called Forest Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
And Beth's going to talk a little bit more about that program.
Yes, I am. So part of the goals for our project is to identify, assess, and recommend different things about trees. So to do that, we're using a program called Forest Metrics, which allows us to put all the information about a tree into one place, and then from that place, it allows us to manipulate the data that we've collected. So here we have to identify the tree. There's a space in the program to do that. And then you can add in things about the dimensions so that you get an idea of how large the tree is, its condition, the dieback associated with it, and then we can assign a priority value of how high of a priority it is to implement our recommendations. And there's a space to put recommendations as well. And from that, it can generate different maps, spreadsheets, and things like that. So it's kind of a database where you can put all of your information, and then from that database, it allows you to do a lot of different things. So it's going to be a pretty key part of allowing the town to interact with the information that we're collecting.
Yep, and knowing what's here, and it gives us a good look at which direction we want to go in. So we've gone and we've done a good portion of the assessment already, in identification, and assessment. And we're going to show you some of the examples of what that looks like. And then we're going to open it up for some questions to see. So Beth, go ahead and take the next step here with some of the data.
All right. So, you want to talk on the trees?
So yeah, it was interesting to find after we went and recorded the trees along in the park and along Main Street for about 2/3 up Main Street up to as far as the YMCA from East End Park, which is across from Dairy Queen. This is the chart that we've ended up with so far, and you can notice that there's 3 tall stacks that constitutes only 3 tree species, and most of the sugar maples are of a mature age, and the pear tree is an ornamental tree that a lot of towns have placed, because it's a smaller flowering, it has a lot of attributes to it, but it also has a lot of disadvantages to that. But we have a lot of those. And then the last one is honey locust, which is a nice tree as well. But you can see how small the other bar graphs are and how small a number we have of those. And of those 10 different kinds of trees on that bottom row, 12 of them are in East End Park because of some of the investments the town's made to put new tree species there. So, so I think that what this exemplifies is, okay, so this is now what we have. Are these the trees we want to have? And what kind of condition are they in? So that kind of begins to point in a direction we may or may not want to go in. So anything else to add there, Beth?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that that's of the 30 species of trees shown in the recent years, a third of them have been added by the town. So of the 30 species, 11 have been added recently.
In this area, yeah.
So, and then,
So then we have, there will be another chart, the next image we come across will show these trees more specifically. But right here, this is showing priorities of trees. And the red is high priority. And fortunately, we have few in this area that because I think we've invested a lot into East End Park, taking a lot of the most hazardous trees down. But along the road there, there's a few trees that are mostly of pruning that have dead wood and sort, but it's a small number. But then the next column is medium, and we have quite a bit of medium priority work to do, but that's the idea, is that we can go ahead and take care of the worst first, and then move to the medium, and then there's low. And low is just kind of the care of those trees that we have deemed long-term trees and we want to put a little extra care into. So why this is so significant is that when we bring in a tree crew, for instance, for a day because a branch fell on a particular road, and they got to mobilize their entire crew to get there and exercise the elimination of that one problem, that's very costly. But if we say, come on in and take out all of our high priorities, it's much more efficient. The town will save quite a bit more money in that kind of knowledge. So we can, and then we'll get to the other map that shows this. Yeah. So.
yeah, so from the program that we talked about earlier, Forest Metrics, you can generate, yes, so we can create an interactive map, and this one is being viewed in Google Earth Pro, which is a free downloadable program offline, and we've been able to take the information and put it into this. So if you hover over, you can zoom in, hover over, whatever you want to do. Hover over one spot, you can click on that, and it comes up with the name of the tree, the dimensions, what kind of condition it's in, and any notes that we may have on it and on that tree care. And the points can be color-coded to a variety of things, but here it's being shown according to priority, which corresponds to the slide that we just showed. But so here the blue is no priority, green is low priority, yellow is medium, and red is high. And if you zoom out, you can see most of our high priority trees are right along this center corridor and mostly correspond to dead limbs in high-risk areas or threatening areas to sidewalks and things like that. So, yeah, so if you click on it, you can see remove large dead limbs. There you go.
As a recommendation.
As a recommendation.
So.
And this is a program that can be accessible by anyone because it's free.
And also, whatever arborist company is hired to do the work, you could just show them this map and they can just locate all the trees that need attention, and they can get all the information, a large part before they even arrive to that, to the site. So, and so you can see how that's as far as we've gotten as far as the recording, and before we continue the project, we want to make sure we had the meeting and make sure there was anything we were missing or anyone had any questions about some of the work we've been doing.
And I think we're continuing down until about here. So we're, in terms of the number of trees, probably about 2/3 done, but then still have a little bit of distance to go. Yeah.
And then,
And then,
Beth, can I ask a question?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
That's our next slide.
So, well, if you go back, do you have the means to be able to do a search for a specific species? I
Oh.
saw the elm made the list, that there's at least a few of them in
The
town.
elm, yeah, there's one elm that we've identified next to where the old Cumberland Farms was.
Yeah.
Not in the best of shape, but
Yeah, it's a little rough.
yeah, it's a bit rough. So on the map right now, there's not a feature to be able to search by tree.
Okay.
But this is kind of a little bit more of a basic version. If we use in ArcGIS software instead, we might be able to make things a little bit more versatile and create some sort of search that way. But we haven't gotten to that step in analyzing our data yet. So yeah.
And I know you already know this, but elms were such a popular tree for street plantings because they're good for soil compaction, beautiful crown. Problem is Dutch elm disease pretty much wipes them out. And then now we're on to the Asian longhorn beetle and emerald ash borer. So I know when you get into that kind of study for pathology, more of like the health of the trees, I'm assuming, like, I'm surprised the honey locust was one that came up as needed some help. That's usually a really great street tree, a little messy, but usually can do very well, especially in a downtown area. But that's the goal, is you're gonna recommend specific species, and then I would assume gonna stagger them, not all one species, but so we don't have to worry about hopefully pests in the future as much.
So that's one of the objectives, yes. I think we found in the park that there was a lot of sugar maple, of course, and they're beautiful and majestic, or like the elm we talked about, where they all were lining the streets and it was beautiful. But you know, one pest comes in and they're all wiped out at all one time. So I think the goal to this, first of all, is to see what we have and to figure out the economics associated with taking care of what we have, but also like where's it going, and that's an important key piece to this. And biodiversity is going to be really important moving forward, and trees that will be able to adapt to the changing climates. And to your point with the elm tree, there are varieties out here that I'm seeing being planted often that are disease resistant now to that. Now resistant, not
Yep.
foolproof, but better.
Are they crossing them with like a Chinese version?
There's
Okay.
there's some of that going on.
Okay.
But I would say that we were thinking about maybe putting some of those into the park, for example, and bringing some of that back. So that's important. I think also too, we have to look at the trees that are there and what kind of condition they're in. How much do we want to invest in those, as opposed to going a different direction? I think that after we're done with this process, we're going to get a much clearer idea of how we want to allocate those kinds of funds to maintain what you have, which is something, but is it the right thing to have, and then maybe coming up with a better idea for the future.
And then to add to what he's saying, one of the things we're hoping to get from the public information meeting is some kind of guidance or recommendations or aspirations, maybe is even a better term, from the public. You know, we've thrown out some ideas that we thought would be, you know, really cool to do. On Elm Street, plant elm streets. On Maple Street, you know, maples. Spruce Street, you know, that's just kind of cool. But is it practical? Do people have other ideas? Do they want something that flowers, or do they just want something that's low maintenance? Do they want them in their yards, or do they want them in the medians? You know, so do people think we have too many trees? Do they think we don't have enough? We don't. The whole point of going to the public is to get feedback so that we can create the urban forest that the townspeople want. I mean, we'd be happy doing what we want, but we don't want to put the town's resources into something that the town isn't on board with. So again, the other reason for this meeting is to get input from the citizens to give us guidance, and we'll do what we can to try to accommodate anything that makes sense, or discount something that doesn't for whatever technical reasons. So it's kind of a little more to your question.
Yeah, and just to clarify with the background here is a street in Oregon before and after the emerald ash borer came through, which was a pest that decimated the ash population. As you can see, a lack of biodiversity on this street caused everything to have to be removed. So we're hoping to avoid that in the future with different.
Yeah, and just a little bit of
diversity.
history. In the past, I don't know, when did the ash borer really start hitting us? 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah.
we're spending over $100,000 a year taking down ash trees in town. Just ash trees, that doesn't count everything else. So, you know, these concerns are legit. We want to try to avoid planting trees that are prone to, you know, these types of vectors.
I think I saw a question in the back.
Candace, you want to swing that mic around?
Candace Bouchard, 135 Riverton Road. So how much is the grant?
It's a total of 5,000.
It's 5,000?
Correct, plus a
Got
$5,000 match for a total project cost of 10,000.
And so the purpose is to, really right now, is to get the inventory and determine what we have?
That's the
And then make
first priority.
recommendations?
Yeah, the first priority is the assessment, you know, the inventory and assessment. After that, the planning comes. You know, this is a urban forestry, urban and community forestry planning grant. So it's really about, you know, the planning.
So it'll help we get all the 4 or 5 trees on Main Street replaced?
It'll certainly be part of that.
So there's only a survey, this is only to analyze, but it's not to replace or maintain?
At this point.
This is the beginnings of a full maintenance and replacement program. So eventually it would lead to that, but
Because we never maintained anything on Main Street, only on the green so far.
not as much as we could or should,
Haven't.
right? Well,
I've
not
cut,
much.
I've had them paid to be maintained on the medians, you know, but no fertilizing or anything like that. But, so this isn't gonna help us get trees. It's just to analyze what we have.
So it's not gonna help us get trees tomorrow. It's gonna help us get trees when we have a plan that we can say, this makes sense, and we can go to the public and say, hey, you know, we want to, or we don't want to. You know, like, we need to find that out.
Right, so
You know.
it's not gonna help tomorrow if someone hits a
Not
tree.
tomorrow, no.
No. Okay,
Um,
thank you.
Only in the sense that if a tree gets hit tomorrow and we do our next inventory and it's gone, there's further record that something's gone missing.
Questions?
More clarifying questions. My first one was if you could, you'd said that most of the tree diversity that has come in was through a town project. I was just wondering when that has started and how long it's been going on for.
I'll start
Yeah,
at the
go ahead,
very
yeah.
beginning of this
Yeah,
one,
sure.
but then I'm gonna have to hand off to you. So we did our first tree inventory of the park, East End Park, maybe 5 years ago. We had some hazard trees, and Eric looked at them and says, you know, you really need to prune the dead wood out, give the living trees a chance to improve or not improve. So we got a contractor in and they trimmed out, they spent, you know, 2 or 3 days in there just picking away and actually pruning those trees, and it made a huge difference. So we also learned some of those trees weren't gonna make it. That's when we started taking down those trees, mostly to avoid the liability. But then came the cries from the public, well, how come you're taking trees down and not planting them? So that's when we started going, you know, to Eric and say, okay, we gotta replant some trees, cause that's what you do. And then he comes up with a question, okay, what do you wanna plant? And that's where it got out of my area of expertise. I would've just put back in what came out. But, you know, because of the reasons he talked about, you wanna have a diverse type of, you know, number of trees so that you're not impacted by one vector, you know, be it the emerald ash borer or the pine beetles or whatever. So we handed it off and said, hey, can you give us some recommendations? That's when the diversity started. We started adding trees so that we'd have a variety of trees and a healthier park with, you know, and some of those trees weren't real good looking, they were never maintained, and so we're trying to get there. So that's the start of it. And you can talk on why we chose what we chose and you know, how we got there.
Yeah, for that project, it was, the park had 2 different types of personalities. The top part of the park was very dry, and the other part was more wet. So I think that's the first place to start when you're picking trees. What kind of environment are they going to be in? And then, what are they going to look like ultimately? So after we figured out what trees would go into each location, then it was aesthetics and then distance. Because 2 trees too close together, which we found a lot on Main Street. The problem with a lot of those trees, they're just jammed in. They have been for so long, and they're reaching for light and becoming now a liability. So then we just selected based on aesthetics combined with growing conditions, and we're slowly, taking up the space available to us in the park based on their more mature size ultimately. So they'll have, nice big canopies. So that's kind of, and that was about, to answer your question, I think we put our first tree in 3 years ago.
Okay.
3 years ago or so.
And then, he made mention of space available. We have to be mindful of different programs that occur in the park. Sometimes they set up tents, they have concerts, so we can't just fill every area. We've got to, so we're trying to work around, the needs of the public, and this is why the public, any feedback we can get from the public, it just helps us make better decisions.
Yeah, we also tried to, in tree selection, use mostly native species for the park beautification project.
It's true. Yep. That's definitely more of a trend that we have to look at moving forward. The native that are more, more well equipped for our environments because they've grown up. It's native to this area, of course. But so, for instance, the trees in downtown on the medium strip, they're a nice tree in the spring when they bloom white, and they're a nice fall color, but their downfall is the fact that they have structural integrity issues. So, it's possible in our future, if we don't properly maintain those trees with pruning, that an ice storm will take and can wipe out an entire street with one big storm. So we have that underfoot right now by that one graph showing that was the majority of our trees in these areas. So those are the things we're looking at, and whether, it's going to take proper pruning to keep that from happening. And that's going to be a regular input. How much is that going to cost? And how much is that going to cost compared to putting in new trees that would be better equipped for the situation in the room that we have? So, and I know there's a couple of spots that could use trees in town, but the area just isn't quite big enough to accommodate a tree.
So
We
I
have
have a
that as
question, it may be a little premature, but you've done assessment of a lot of the Main Street trees. Were those the right tree for the area? Because they were, my understanding is the Shade Tree Commission, picked these trees because they were supposed to be the right tree. They weren't going to get too big. They were, low maintenance but high, curb appeal, that kind of thing. Did they do an okay job with those, or is there a better option now?
I think in that story, it depends on what age you're looking at that tree, for instance. I think when you're younger and it's filling out, it ends up being an appropriate size. Like the picture, is that picture up there? Yeah, like this is an appropriate size at this point in time for that situation. But those do get big. Those are the same trees that are across from Dairy Queen, so they're going to get 40 feet tall eventually.
Those are the same trees as
Yeah,
those,
yeah,
really?
Yeah, so they're all going to get big, and it's about when they're 30 years down the road that they begin to get subject to that included bark that's between 2 vertically growing limbs, and then all of a sudden if pressure starts, and then you go ahead with the snow load and it breaks them apart. So that's where the pruning comes in and takes the pressure off of those joints, and that's how we can perpetuate those. So yes, to answer your question, was it a good tree? It is to a certain duration of time, but then maybe not so much.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. At the honey locust, that's on the once as you're approaching town from the west on the right-hand side, we have a lot of beautiful honey locusts. They need to be pruned and cleaned up a little bit, and we've outlined that in the specifics for recommendations. There's trees growing through them that need to be cleaned out, and et cetera. But that's a really good choice, and you mentioned those earlier, Lance, about the honey locusts, and but they're a wide tree, so you have to have room for them. I think the medium strip is a tricky one. So is that tree appropriate for the median? It is for now. And it's a hard niche to fill. It's a very narrow spot. Did that answer your question?
It answered mine, yeah.
Okay.
Did we answer yours?
Any other questions?
You did answer my first question, yes.
Okay.
I had another one.
Okay.
I was just wondering, you had mentioned that it's a lot more expensive to bring a tree crew in for one branch that's fallen in a storm versus bringing them in in advance to do a lot of pruning. And I was just wondering if you could touch a little bit more on the reason why that's more of a cost for just one limb versus bringing them in to do whole pruning in advance of dead wood, stuff that could fall down?
Yep, that's a good question, because often when a limb breaks randomly with storm breaks especially, or something like, it's usually an emergency call, so that can increase the cost. You have to mobilize a crew, and that tends to have a premium on it. But also, if you go to do this tree and you're a company with a full crew, you don't leave some at home. They all go. And so there might be 2 guys standing around, and the rest of the guys are doing the work, or whoever's on the crew. And so there's an inefficiency there. But if you were to go in and know that tree that did fall was a potential hazard, plus there's 4 or 5 in the area that are potential hazards, you could fan out and do a lot more productive work. So perhaps that visit is more expensive, relatively speaking, to do the full day, but you're getting a lot more work than just this one little tree being taken care of.
Yeah,
Does that make
that
sense?
mobilization cost,
Yeah.
it's gonna cost you $1,000 to get them to show up. So you might as well get a whole day's worth of work for 2,000, and get way more work done.
It's kind of, yep.
That makes sense. Great,
Thank you.
thank you.
All right.
I got another question that people might be asking. Are you gonna make any recommendations for mountain laurels to be planted in town?
There should be some more around. I think so. And again, it's finding the right site for them. You can't just plunk them anywhere.
Right.
And their conditions are generally, they like the sun, but they don't like to get dried out. So that's sometimes a hard one to find. But we can make amendments to it.
Yeah, we've been talking about the area where we just finished Upland Road, that brand-new slope that used to be a failing retaining wall and full of invasive weeds. We'd like to at least get some in there. There's also gonna be a welcome to Winstead sign there too, so it would just really all flow right together.
And maybe some in the park. I've had some inquiries from people visiting saying, we need some more mountain laurel in the park. So I think that'd be a good place to put some as well. And that'd be a great environment for them to dapple light and et cetera, and maybe near the bandstand. So that's another area that we can look at.
But again, this is another reason for public input, so town website, you can go to Public Works or a town manager's website or, address, and just throw your ideas at us and we'll implement them into whatever plans that we develop.
This is following up on Candace's question about planning. So I know you can't suddenly plant 100 trees tomorrow. So in terms of planning, how does the town budget a plan for the use, I would love to see the picture that you showed where there's a beautiful tree-lined streets and that they're all appropriate trees, because it definitely makes an aesthetic difference to have these majestic trees, which of course take years to grow. But what would the planning look like in terms of timing and your next step that you've maybe already seen based on this inventory program?
I can take a stab at that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So how the town budget works, because ultimately what either makes this happen or makes it not happen is gonna be funding. If people want trees and are willing to fund them, we'll get them. And about the only way to get that funding is to communicate to them that there was some thought that went into it, and paint a picture of what's working now or not working versus what could work better, and hope they align. And if you don't get their opinions early, the odds of it aligning are, less. Not to say you wouldn't hit on most of it, but people want to believe in it, or else they're just not going to vote to fund it. The money for this, unless they made some special appropriation, would come out of our parks fund, which it's essentially cutting the grass. I put a little bit more in each year to try to get a couple of trees, and we've been able to get a couple. We've made some progress, but it's really slow. You know, we haven't done a Main Street tree, maybe one. But the parks, we wanted to start where the people, you know, are, where we had more control. And, you know, I don't even know the level of responsibility being in the state right of way. You know, that's a whole nother challenge that we have to deal with. So I try to pick away at the low-hanging fruit to make some progress. You know, one of the things we did, actually I think Eric did that, it took a couple of years before we noticed some benefits, but the pruning of those fruit trees over by the Revolutionary War Monument and then Flatiron Park down the west end, those trees, they're fruit trees of some type. They kind of flowered a little bit, but maybe not the year after you did it, but the year after that, wow, they just popped. It was this beautiful pink, you know, it was like, where did these come from? And that's what maintenance does. And if we don't identify what we have, we don't know how to maintain it, so we can't make that leap. And that was cheap compared to what you got. You know, so that's the cost effectiveness. Maintain what you have first, then put some new ones in. That would be my philosophy.
Well, I think the beautification of a town adds to the value of the town. It attracts people to the town, and therefore it increases businesses in town. So I think it's a valuable investment, whether it's 1 tree a year or 20 trees a year. So I appreciate the effort here from the town and from you in,
Yeah.
in heading all of this.
Yeah, I do think you're right. People, it's noticeable. I mean, your slide painted the picture. You know, you look at one, yeah, it's a street. You look at the other one, like, yeah, I want to hang out there. Like, that's what we want to see. We want people to go, wow, this is really nice, and come down to the park for a concert or a parade, and you know, be able to stand under a shade tree and not get cooked during a parade. And you know, it all feeds on itself. But you know, we've got to know what we have so we can do the inexpensive maintenance first. This is not too distant, you know, too far from what we did with the road improvement project. We had to do an assessment, then we had to do an evaluation and decide, maintain what's cost effective to maintain first, then go after the bad stuff. And you know, that's the first road improvement we've done in this town in decades. So it's a very similar process, but this is the infancy.
Yeah, that's a large part of the plan. I was going to add to that. That's the whole idea that's very important about this is being able to understand how many trees we do need to put in. And that's what everyone's going to ask is how much is this all going to cost. So once you have a value associated with how much it's going to cost to do certain things, then you can begin to have people get on board and say, okay, well, that's a reasonable amount to spend on that or what have you. So this is definitely the fundamental step in just kind of assessing and kind of figure out how much we need to invest to get to that ultimate objective, which I think that's the whole key of this whole meeting tonight is finding out what our ultimate objective is. What does that look like? And make sure as many people are on board as possible. And then we can start to work towards it. But if we don't know where we're going, it'll be kind of tricky to get there. So,
There you go.
yeah.
So if I may
Urban
just say, thank you very much for your question, because this is something in our land use department, which I'm part of, is conversations we have often. So, and one great thing to look up, if you go on eBay and you look for old postcards of Winstead, Winchester, and one of my favorite ones is Meadow Street, where you see it's all lined with street trees, and look how much different it is than you go out there now and look at it. So that is the kind of planning we want to get into, and obviously this is the first step to do the inventory, which then can go for grant money for making those improvements down the line. But yeah, that's the goal, so thank you for
Yeah.
saying that.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope there's good response and grant money available in the future, too, to help support that.
Hope so.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, you know, unless you got something to add,
I think we've got pretty well covered.
yeah, so
This is a question.
I guess in closing, if to sum up the whole point of this is to shift from reactive tree work to proactive tree work, to having, from just saying, oh, this tree fell down tonight, call a crew in, and to your point, the mobilization, I'm calling people in at midnight, they come out, take the tree down, clear the road. It's just not, that's not tree management. So trying to do something proactive where you can plan and be efficient and smart, and, you know, you work with the land use office so that when they have a development coming in, you don't come in and put trees in right before they develop. You find out what you can do to help them and, you know, work in synergy, and everybody can benefit from that. But you need to have a plan that someone can look at and buy into before you're gonna get those synergies. So it's a, you know, it's a process like everything else. Nothing in government happens quickly. It's just, you know, understanding what you have and then getting a vision. Is that good enough, or do you want something different, and how do you get there? So if you take one thing away, it's going from reactive to proactive, and the costs and benefits associated with that. So if there's any other questions, we'd be happy to answer them. If not, we will close the meeting and hopefully get responses via email through the town website that we can incorporate into our planning. And then at some point, once we have what we think is a reasonable draft of a first plan, we'll probably have some other kind of a meeting to just put it out there. So the sooner people get their information to us, you know, the earlier it gets into the planning process, because you don't want to leave it up to just me. So, so anyway, thank you for attending, and that'll do it. Thanks.